The first snowfall in Dayton. Amina Begum had never seen snow until she was 72 years old. She stood at the kitchen window of the little brick house on Princeton Drive, watching fat white flakes drift past the street lamp like slow-motion jasmine petals. Behind her, the electric stove clicked as the pot of halim came to a boil. The smell, cardamom, fried onions, slow-cooked wheat and lamb, filled the house the way it once filled her courtyard in Karachi. "Amma, close the curtain, you'll freeze," called Sarah from the living room. Amina smiled without turning. "Beta, this is the first time in my life snow is falling on my roof. Let me look." Sarah, 26, born in Ohio, hijab only on Fridays, rolled her eyes the way American grandchildren do, but she came and stood beside her grandmother anyway. Together they watched the quiet white invasion. It had been 18 months since Amina arrived on a one-way ticket. Her son Tariq, the cardiologist, had said, "Ma, the house is too big for just us now that the kids are grown. Come, we'll take care of you." She had cried for 3 days in her flat in Gulshan Iqbal, packing 60 years of memories into 2 red suitcases. Then she kissed the framed photo of her late husband, locked the door, and flew across the world. Ohio was nothing like Karachi. Here the air did not carry the call to prayer or the smell of sea salt. Here the milkman did not ring a bicycle bell at dawn. Here the neighbors smiled and waved, but never invited you in for chai unless it was Christmas. And yet, strangely, Amina had started to feel something like home. The front door burst open. Cold air and her 12-year-old grandson Ahmed tumbled in together. "Daddy, it's sticking. Come make a snowman with me." Amina laughed, the sound bright as temple bells. "Ahmed, I am wearing shalwar camis. I will become an ice lolly." "I brought you clothes." He held up one of Sarah's old puffy jackets, bright purple, and a pair of Ugg boots that looked like furry spaceships. Sarah helped wrestle her grandmother into the layers. When the hood went up, only Amina's eyes were visible, coal-lined, mischievous, alive. Outside, the street was already white. Ahmed ran in circles. Amina took one careful step, then another, gasping at the crunch beneath her boots. Snowflakes melted on her eyelashes. "Make a ball, Daddy, like this." She bent, joints creaking, and scooped the cold wetness into her gloved hands. It was softer than she expected, like frozen malai. She rolled it the way she once rolled dough for sheer kurma. Bigger, bigger, until Ahmed had to push with her. Half an hour later, they had a respectable snowman wearing Tariq's old Cincinnati Bengals cap, and a dupatta Amina sacrificed from her suitcase. Mrs. Henderson from next door came out with her golden retriever. "Well, I'll be first snowman on the block this year." She smiled at Amina. "You look like you were born for this, ma'am." Amina beamed. "In my country we only have snow in films. Today Allah gave me a bonus." Mrs. Henderson laughed and invited them in for hot chocolate. Amina hesitated. She had never tasted chocolate that wasn't Cadbury from the corner store, but Ahmed dragged her along. Inside, the Henderson house smelled of cinnamon and pine. A Christmas tree twinkled in the corner. Amina stared, enchanted. She had seen these trees on TV, but never one breathing the same air as her. Mrs. Henderson handed her a mug. "Careful, it's hot." Amina blew on it the way she blew on dude patty back home, then took a sip. Her eyes widened. This is like midai in liquid form." Ahmed laughed so hard he spilled half his mug. That night, after Maghrib prayer on a towel in the corner of her bedroom, Amina opened her old steel diary and wrote in careful Urdu. Day 547 in America. Today I touched snow for the first time. It is cold but gentle, like the hand of a stranger who wishes you no harm. Ahmed says snow is just frozen rain, but I think it is Allah writing love letters to the earth. Mrs. Henderson gave me hot chocolate. I think I will ask Sarah to buy the powder. I will add a lychee and make it Desi style. Perhaps I will take some to Mrs. Henderson tomorrow. Maybe this is how neighbors become family, one sweet cup at a time. She closed the diary, turned off the lamp, and fell asleep to the soft hush of snow against the window. She did not know yet that the snowman would melt by noon, or that 3 houses down, an old American lady named Betty was crying because her husband had died last winter, and she had no one to build snowmen with anymore. She did not know that in 2 weeks Betty would knock on the door holding a plate of oatmeal raisin cookies. asking if the nice Pakistani lady could teach her how to make that amazing-smelling soup. She did not know that by spring the entire cul-de-sac would call her Nanny Amina, that the mosque in Beaver Creek would ask her to teach cooking classes to the bored teenagers, that she would start a Sunday Halim tradition that brought 30 people, Pakistani, Somali, white, black, old, young, into her son's dining room every week. She only knew that tonight, for the first time since her husband died, she fell asleep without crying. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the strange city in forgiveness. The cookies that started everything. Betty Thompson had lived at 412 Princeton Drive for 43 years. She knew every crack in the sidewalk, every dog that ever barked too loud, every child who learned to ride a bike in the cul-de-sac. She also knew, now, the exact smell of grief. It was the empty chair at the breakfast table and the silence that followed the creak of floorboards when no one answered, "Good morning, hun." Harold had died the previous February, 2 days after Valentine's Day. The funeral had been well-attended, firefighters in dress uniforms, the entire bowling league, half the garden club, but funerals end. Neighbors bring casseroles for a week, maybe 2, then life tiptoes away and leaves you alone with the quiet. Betty baked when she was sad. She had baked so much since February that her freezer looked like a Keebler warehouse. Oatmeal raisin, snickerdoodle, chocolate chip, peanut butter. She left plates on porches with little notes, "Thinking of you." People thanked her and closed their doors. One Sunday in early December, the wind smelled different. Spices she couldn't name drifted across the snow, like a memory from a country she had never visited. She stood on her porch in Harold's old flannel robe and watched smoke curl from the chimney next door. The new family, the Pakistani doctor and his mother, had been polite but distant. Betty had waved. The old lady had waved back with a smile that felt like sunlight. That afternoon Betty found herself at the kitchen counter again, rolling dough with hands that still expected Harold to steal a taste. She baked 24 oatmeal raisin cookies, arranged them on her best holly plate, and before she could talk herself out of it, marched next door. Amina opened the door in a bright green shalwar kameez, flower on one cheek. "Assalamu alaikum," she said, then caught herself. "I mean hello, yes." Betty thrust the plate forward like a peace offering. "I'm Betty from next door. I brought cookies. I smelled your cooking all morning and it made me hungry for company." Amina's eyes softened. She stepped aside at once. "Walaikum salam and welcome. Come, come, shoes off please, we are Desi people, floors are sacred." Betty kicked off her boots and padded in socks embroidered with tiny Christmas trees. The house smelled like Karachi and heaven had collided. Garlic, ginger, ghee, something slow-cooked and sinful. In the kitchen, a gigantic steel pot simmered. Ahmed was sneaking pieces of fried onion from a bowl. Sarah was on the phone arguing with someone about insurance billing. Amina took the plate, inhaled deeply, and made a sound of pure delight. "Oh ho, these are famous American cookies. I will taste one right now and shame my own cooking." She bit, chewed, eyes closed. "Ya Allah, oats and raisins and so much butter. This is what love would taste like if love had calories." Betty laughed for the first time in weeks. Amina set the plate down and lifted the lid of the pot. Steam billowed out. "This is Halim, takes 7 hours, you will sit and eat with us, no argument." Betty opened her mouth to protest. She had a frozen lasagna at home. She wasn't dressed, she was imposing, but Amina was already pulling out a chair. They gave her a bowl the size of a small satellite dish. Amina spooned in the thick, creamy wheaten meat porridge, topped it with fried onions, fresh ginger slivers, lemon wedges, and green chilies that looked innocent but could strip paint. Betty took a tentative bite. Her eyes widened, she took another and another. 10 minutes later, she was on her second helping, tears running down her cheeks. Amina panicked. "Too spicy, I told Ahmed not to put extra chilies." Betty shook her head, laughing through the tears. "No, honey, it's just nobody's cooked for me since Harold left. This tastes like somebody cares." Ahmed looked horrified at the idea of an adult crying, and fled to play Fortnite. Sarah quietly set another spoon on the table and left the two old ladies alone. Amina reached across and patted Betty's hand. My husband died 11 years ago. First year I cooked for 20 people every night so the house would not feel empty. You are not alone in this, Betty's sister. Betty wiped her eyes with a paper towel. Would you teach me how to make this? I've got nothing but time and a freezer full of cookies nobody needs. Amina's smile could have powered the neighborhood. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. Bring your biggest pot and your grief. We will cook it into something delicious. That night Betty wrote in the little leather journal she hadn't opened since Harold's death. December 11. A Pakistani grandmother just fed me dinner and called me sister. I cried into barley and lamb, and it tasted like hope. Tomorrow I learn to cook again. Harold, you would have stolen half the fried onions. Across the driveway, Amina added to her own diary. Betty has blue eyes like the sea I have never seen. Her husband is with Allah now, same as mine. Tomorrow I will teach her Halim. Maybe we will teach each other how to live again. The Halim lessons. Tuesday 10:07 a.m. Betty arrived wearing a Christmas sweater with reindeer that lit up when you pressed the nose. Amina opened the door in a flour-dusted apron that read World's Okayest Cook. A gift from Sarah after one particularly smoky biryani incident. You are late, Amina teased. In my house, late means you wash the dishes. Betty laughed so hard Rudolph's nose started blinking like a disco. She carried a heavy cast-iron Dutch oven Harold had bought her in 1987 and never once used. They began with the meat. Amina laid out 2 pounds of beef shank and 1 pound of boneless lamb. See these white parts? That is the magic. Collagen turns into glue that makes Halim silky. Betty nodded solemnly, as though she were being shown the Holy Grail. Next came the grains: wheat, berries, barley, 3 kinds of lentils. Amina poured them into separate bowls, like a pharmacist measuring medicine. Betty stared. We have to soak all of these overnight. Overnight is for amateurs, Amina declared. We are grandmothers, we cheat. She produced a pressure cooker, the size of a small torpedo. 45 minutes later, the grains were soft enough to mash with the back of a spoon. While the grains cooled, they made the spice mix. Amina lined up little steel bowls: coriander, cumin, black pepper, cloves, cinnamon, black cardamom, fennel, dried red chilies. Betty sniffed each one like a bloodhound. This black one smells like a forest, she said, holding the cardamom. That is why we crack it open and throw the skin away. Forest is nice to visit, not to eat. They toasted the spices until the kitchen smelled like a bazaar in Lahore. Betty's eyes watered. I thought my eyes were done crying this year. Amina handed her a tissue and a wicked grin. Welcome to Desi cooking. Tears are part of the recipe. The meat went into another pressure cooker with ginger, garlic, turmeric, and enough salt to make a cardiologist faint. Tariq walked past, took one look, and muttered, "Ma, my patience," before fleeing. By noon the house was a steam room. They sat on the kitchen floor, because grandmothers' knees don't care about chairs, and began the long, meditative beating of the Halim with a giant wooden galna, a tool that looked suspiciously like a baseball bat. Betty's arms gave out after 10 minutes. I'm 75, not Hercules. Amina took over, beating with the steady rhythm of someone who had done this for 50 years. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Every stroke is a prayer, she said. You are telling the wheat, become soft, become one with the meat, become comfort. Betty watched, mesmerized. Harold used to say I beat cookie dough like I was angry at it. You beat like you love it. That is the secret, Amina said. Anger makes tough cookies, love makes Halim. They took turns until the mixture was smoother than cake batter and shone like silk. Then came the tadka. Ghee heated until it shimmered, onions sliced paper-thin and fried until they were dark gold jewels. Betty learned the wrist flick that makes onions dance instead of burn. She burned the first batch anyway. Amina simply scraped them into the trash and said, "First pancake always fails. Second batch is for Allah." At 4:30 p.m. the halim was ready. They garnished 2 bowls: crispy onions, fresh ginger matchsticks, lemon wedges, chopped cilantro, and a spoonful of sizzling ghee tadka that hissed like gossip. Betty took one bite and closed her eyes. "This is ridiculous," she whispered. Amina raised an eyebrow. "Ridiculous good or ridiculous bad? There should be a law against food this good. It's unfair to soup." They ate in silence until the bowls were empty. Then Betty did something that surprised them both. She leaned over and kissed Amina on the cheek, leaving a tiny ghee shine. "Thank you," she said, voice thick. "I forgot I still had taste buds." Amina waved her off, embarrassed, and immediately started packing leftovers into Tupperware. "You will freeze in small portions. When you are sad, heat one. Sadness cannot survive this halim." Betty went home with 3 containers, a jar of fried onions, and a heart that felt 2 sizes larger. That night, she wrote in her journal. December 13. I spent 7 hours cooking with a woman I met 2 days ago. My arms ache, my kitchen smells like a spice market, and I laughed until I snorted. Harold, wherever you are, save room. I'm learning to feed people again. Across the driveway, Amina added a new line to her diary. Betty's laugh is like a bell that was silent for too long. Today we fed each other. Tomorrow maybe we feed the whole street. The first Sunday. Word travels fast on Princeton Drive when it smells like fried onions and forgiveness. By Friday, 3 neighbors had knocked on Amina's door asking if the amazing soup was ever going to happen again. Mrs. Henderson wanted to bring her famous cornbread. The Somali family at number 419 asked if they could contribute sambusas. The teenage twins from 407, half Korean, half Irish, fully addicted to TikTok, offered to film everything for content. Amina looked at the calendar, saw Sunday was free, and declared, "From this week, every Sunday after Zuhr prayer, my door is open. Bring a bowl, bring a friend, bring nothing, just come hungry." Tariq came home that evening to find his dining table pushed against the wall, the living room carpet rolled up, and 20 folding chairs borrowed from the mosque. "Ma, we have 12 actual chairs. Allah will provide the rest," she said, and kept stirring. Sunday 1:17 p.m. The first knock came early. Betty arrived wearing a red and green hijab she had sewn herself, slightly crooked, entirely earnest. She carried cornbread in one hand and a pan of macaroni and cheese in the other. "I wasn't sure what went with Halim," she whispered, "so I brought comfort." Amina kissed her on both cheeks. Comfort goes with everything. By 1:45, the house was chaos in the best way. Mrs. Henderson set up a card table of cornbread and honey butter. Khadija and Yuba, the Somali sisters, laid out golden sambusas and bright red-hot sauce that made Ahmed cry after one bite. Mr. Patel from the gas station brought 2 trays of jalbi so orange they glowed. The twins, Liam and Sioyun, set up ring lights and announced they were live-streaming Nanny Amina's Halim Sundays. A white lady from the library named Ruth showed up with a vegan lentil stew, just in case. 3 firefighters who had once treated Tariq's heart attack patient arrived in a huge red truck because someone told them there was life-changing food. Amina stood on a stool in the middle of her living room and clapped like a school principal. "Rules," she shouted over the noise. 1. Take off shoes. 2. Take only what you can finish. Wasting food makes angels cry. 3. If you like it, you must take a container home for someone who is sick or lonely. That is the real point. Now eat." The first ladle hit the first bowl, and the room went quiet except for the sound of spoons and pure happiness. Betty sat between Khadija and Ruth, teaching them how to squeeze lemon over the halim until it sings. Ahmed ran around refilling water glasses and bragging that his grandmother was basically famous now. Tariq gave up trying to control anything and just ate 3 bowls while pretending he was supervising. At 3:30 p.m., the twins' livestream hit 4,000 viewers. Comments scrolled. Where is this? I'm driving from Cincinnati right now. Is that cornbread with Halim? I need to speak to the manager of culture. Nanny Amina looks like she could adopt me and fix my life in one hug. By 5:00, the giant pot was empty, scraped clean like it had never existed. People lingered, exchanging numbers, promising recipes, hugging goodbye like family. Betty found Amina in the kitchen, washing dishes the size of satellite dishes. I brought you something, she said, and pressed a small gift into Amina's soapy hands. It was a wooden spoon, hand-carved with the words Nanny Amina, feeder of souls, burned into the handle. Amina turned it over and over, eyes shining. You made this. Harold taught me in 1982. I found his old tools in the garage last week. First thing I carved since he left. Amina pulled Betty into a wet, soapy hug that smelled like onions and love. Outside, the December sun was setting pink and gold over the snow. Inside, 40 people had just become a village. Tariq took a photo, his mother and Betty holding the spoon together, both crying and laughing at the same time. He posted it to the mosque WhatsApp group with the caption, Sunday Halim starts this week, every week. Bring a bowl and an empty heart. Within 10 minutes, 30 new people asked for the address. Amina looked at the phone, looked at the empty pot, looked at Betty's glowing face, and said the only thing that made sense. Next week we need 2 pots. 2 pots, 1 girl, and the night the city showed up. January rolled in like a quiet revolution. Word of Nanny Amina's Sunday Halim had escaped Princeton Drive. First it was the mosque teens posting TikToks. Then the local paper ran a tiny article titled, Pakistani Grandmother Feeds Dayton One Bowl at a Time. Then the university's Muslim Students Association begged to help. Then a local TV station called and asked if they could film for Black History Month, because food is culture, right? Amina's answer was always the same, come hungry, bring friends, leave happier. By the 3rd Sunday in January, they needed 4 pots, not 2. Tariq bought 2 commercial 20-gallon cauldrons on wheels. Amina looked at them like they were spaceships. Betty christened them Halim 1 and Halim 2 with a bottle of rosewater instead of champagne. They moved the operation to the garage heaters borrowed from the mosque, folding tables from the church, plastic tablecloths from Dollar Tree. The driveway became a buffet line. Someone strung fairy lights. Someone else brought a Bluetooth speaker playing old Noor Jehan songs mixed with Frank Sinatra because Betty insisted Harold would approve. Every Sunday the crowd grew. Somali cab drivers came straight from the airport. Nurses from Miami Valley Hospital arrived in scrubs after night shift. The Korean twins brought their entire youth group. An old Vietnam vet named Lyra showed up every week in his purple heart cap and never said much, but always took 3 containers for the boys at the VA. And every week, from the upstairs window of 408 Princeton Drive, a girl watched. Her name was Maya. 17, homeschool senior, chronic depression, chronic insomnia, chronic everything. Her mom worked double shifts at the Amazon warehouse. Her dad had left when she was 9. Most days Maya wore the same black hoodie and didn't speak to anyone. She first smelled the Halim in December and thought someone was burning incense. Then she saw the cars, the lights, the laughter. Then she saw the old Pakistani lady, in bright colors, hugging strangers like they belonged to her. Maya watched for 6 straight Sundays. She never came down. On the last Sunday in January, the temperature dropped to 9 degrees F. The city issued a wind chill warning. Tariq told his mother, Ma, maybe cancel this week. Nobody will come. At 12:30 p.m. the driveway was already full. People stamped snow off their boots and laughed about real Ohio weather. At 1:15 p.m., the front door of 408 opened for the first time in months. Maya stood on the porch in her black hoodie, pajama pants with tiny moons on them, and boots with no socks. Her hair was unbrushed. Her eyes were red from crying or not sleeping, maybe both. Betty spotted her first. She walked over slowly, the way you approach a deer that might bolt. "Hi, sweetheart, you hungry?" Maya's voice came out a croak. "I don't know anyone." "That's the best part," Betty said. "Nobody knows anyone until they do. Come on, I saved you a spot by the heater." She took Maya's freezing hand and led her across the driveway like it was the most natural thing in the world. Amina looked up from stirring Halim one and saw the girl, thin, shaking, eyes too old for 17. Something in Amina's chest cracked open the way ice cracks on a river in spring. She put down the ladle, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked straight to Maya. "Assalamu alaikum, beta," she said softly. "You came." Maya started crying without sound, shoulders shaking. Amina did what grandmothers have done for 10,000 years. She opened her arms. Maya fell into them, like someone who had been carrying the world alone for far too long. The entire driveway went quiet for one heartbeat. Spoons stopped. Music paused. Even the wind seemed to listen. Then Amina spoke, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is Maya. She is my granddaughter now. Anyone who has a problem with that can leave and never come back." Nobody left. Instead, someone started clapping, then someone else. Then the whole crowd was clapping and cheering like Maya had just scored the winning goal. Ahmed ran and got her a folding chair right next to the heater. Khadija draped a warm pashmina around her shoulders. Betty pressed a mug of doodh patty chai into her hands, extra sweet, just enough cardamom. Amina filled the biggest bowl they had, garnished it like it was for royalty, and set it in Maya's lap. "Eat slowly," she said. "Good food waits for broken hearts." Maya took one spoonful. Then another. By the fourth, tears were falling into the halim, and she didn't even care. Halfway through the bowl she looked up, cheeks flushed from steam, and something that might have been hope. "This is the best thing I've ever tasted," she whispered. Amina kissed the top of her head. "Welcome home, beta." Later, when the pots were empty and people were packing leftovers, Maya asked if she could help wash dishes. Amina handed her an apron that said "World's Okayest Cook" and said, "From now on, this one is yours." That night, Maya wrote in the Notes app on her phone, the first words she had written in months. January 29. I left my room today. A grandmother I don't know called me her granddaughter, and the whole street clapped. I ate something that tasted like being loved. I think I might stay alive long enough to find out what happens next. Across the driveway, Amina added one line to her diary before falling asleep. Tonight Alice sent me a sad girl with moon pajamas. I now have 3 grandchildren instead of 2. The pots will need to be bigger again. The girl who stayed. February arrived with a thaw and a miracle. Maya did not go back upstairs. On Monday, she appeared at Amina's kitchen door at 10:17 a.m., wearing the same moon pajama pants, the world's okayest cook, apron tied over them like a cape. "I can peel onions," she announced. "I'm really good at crying." Amina took one look at the dark circles under the girl's eyes, the trembling hands, the stubborn tilt of her chin, and did what any sensible grandmother would do. She handed her a knife and a 10-pound bag of onions. By noon, the kitchen smelled like a battlefield of tears. Maya's eyes were swollen, her nose was running, and she was laughing for the first time in anyone's memory. Sarah walked in, took one look, and texted her brother Ahmed at school. "We have a new stray, she's ours now." That afternoon, Amina taught Maya how to make sheer kurma the proper way, milk reduced for 2 hours, vermicelli toasted until it smells like childhood, saffron that costs more per gram than gold. Maya stirred with the concentration of someone diffusing a bomb. Halfway through, she asked quietly, "Do you think I could sleep on your couch tonight? My mom works nights and the house is loud when it's quiet." Amina did not ask questions. She simply fetched clean sheets, a pillow that smelled like rosewater, and a quilt Betty had sewn from Harold's old flannel shirts. Maya slept 12 hours straight, woke up at 4 a.m., and padded to the kitchen where Amina was already praying Fajr on her Janamas. When Amina finished, she found Maya sitting on the floor, knees to chest, watching the kettle. "I used to pray," Maya whispered. "When I was little, then I got mad at God and stopped." Amina sat beside her, two silhouettes in the blue pre-dawn light. "Allah is very patient," she said. "He waits longer than people." Maya rested her head on Amina's shoulder. "I don't know how to come back." "Then we will go slow," Amina said. "First we make dood patty, then we see." They made tea thick enough to stand a spoon in. They drank it on the back porch, watching the sky turn peach and gold. Maya said, "I think I want to live." Amina kissed her forehead like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. "Good, then we start with breakfast." By the end of the week, Maya had her own drawer in Ahmed's room. He protested, until Amina threatened to make him eat kale. She had a toothbrush in the upstairs bathroom. She had a Friday hijab that Betty helped her wrap, crooked but proud. Her mother, Carla, finally came looking on Saturday night after 3 missed calls and a welfare check from the police. She stood in the doorway at 11 p.m., exhausted in her Amazon vest, eyes red from 12-hour shifts. "I'm here for my daughter," she said, voice cracking. Amina opened the door wider. "Come in, Beta, she's your daughter and my daughter now, we share." Carla started crying before she crossed the threshold. Maya appeared at the top of the stairs in one of Ahmed's oversized hoodies, hair in a messy bun, eyes terrified. Carla opened her arms. Maya flew down the stairs and crashed into her mother like a wave finally reaching shore. They cried so hard the smoke alarm almost went off. Amina made more tea. Betty appeared in her robe. She had started keeping slippers at Amina's house for emergencies. Tariq pretended to read medical journals in the living room and quietly wiped his eyes. Carla drank 3 cups of chai, ate 2 pieces of Betty's banana bread, and listened while Maya talked for the first time in years, about the dark, about the pills she almost took, about the smell of onions that saved her. When Carla finally stood to leave, she hugged Amina so hard both their spines cracked. "I can't pay you," she said. Amina waved her off. "Children are not hotel bills." Carla looked at Maya. "You want to come home?" Maya looked at Amina, then at her mom, then back at Amina. "Can I stay here some nights, and home some nights, like joint custody?" Carla laughed through tears. Joint custody of a teenager, there's a first. And that was how Maya became the only 17-year-old with 2 bedrooms. 3 grandmothers, Amina, Betty, and Mrs. Henderson, who insisted on the title, and a permanent seat at the Halim table. The next day, Maya posted her first TikTok in 2 years. It was just 15 seconds. Her stirring sheer kurma while Amina danced behind her to an old Pakistani song, Betty doing the Macarena in the background, Ahmed photobombed with a ladle. Caption, "Found my people. They cook with love and too much ghee." It got 1.2 million views in 24 hours. Comments flooded in. "This is the found family we all need." Crying at 3 a.m. over strangers being kind. "Nanny Amina, please adopt me next." Maya read them in bed that night, tears falling onto the screen. She whispered to the dark, "Thank you for not letting me leave yet." Downstairs, Amina added 2 new lines to her diary. February 12th. Maya smiled today with her whole face. "I have never seen anything more beautiful. Allah is showing off now." The day the city said no. March came in like a tax auditor. On the first Sunday in March, 2 white vans from the City of Dayton Health Department parked across the street at 12:47 p.m., exactly 13 minutes after the first ladle hit the first bowl. A man in a polo shirt and clipboard stepped out, followed by a woman with a badge that read Environmental Health Supervisor, R. Kowalski. Tariq saw them first. His stomach dropped the way it did when a patient coded. The man approached the garage like he was entering a crime scene. Afternoon. We've received complaints about an unpermitted food distribution event. This needs to stop immediately. The driveway went silent. 50 people, spoons halfway to mouths, stared. Amina wiped her hands on her apron and walked forward, small but unafraid. Complaints from who? Anonymous, the man said, already sounding tired. Look, ma'am, I don't make the rules. You're preparing and serving food to the public without a license, without a commercial kitchen, without inspections. This is a residential zone. We have to shut it down. Betty stepped up beside Amina, arms crossed. You're shutting down grandmother's feeding people. Rules are rules, Supervisor Kowalski said, softer now. She looked almost sorry. You've got 15 minutes to disperse. After that, we issue citations. Fines start at $500. Ahmed whispered, Daddy, what do we do? Amina looked at the pots, still half full. At the faces, black, brown, white, young, old, hungry, hopeful. At Maya clutching her wooden spoon like a sword. Then she did something nobody expected. She smiled. 15 minutes, she said sweetly. Plenty of time, everybody eat faster. The driveway erupted in laughter, and the frantic clatter of spoons. Tarek tried to reason with the inspectors. This isn't a business. No one's charging money, it's charity. Doesn't matter, the man said. Food safety laws apply whether you charge or not. Maya, who had been silent until then, stepped forward. These people are nurses, firefighters, veterans, kids. Some of them haven't eaten a real meal all week. You're going to take their food away because of paperwork. Supervisor Kowalski looked at Maya's earnest, still fragile face and wavered. But the man was already writing the citation. Betty snatched the clipboard out of his hand. You want to find someone, find me. I'm 75, I've got nothing to lose, and I make a mean lawyer's wife. My herald played golf with half the city council. The inspector blinked. Ma'am, give that back. Betty held it higher. Not until you taste the halim. One bite, then you can ruin our day. The driveway crowd started chanting. One bite, one bite. Kowalski sighed, took the offered bowl and tasted. Her eyes closed involuntarily. The man beside her tried to stay stern, but someone shoved a bowl into his hands too. 2 minutes later, both inspectors were sitting on folding chairs, cheeks bulging, asking for extra lemon. While they ate, the Korean twins went live on TikTok. Title: City tries to shut down free food for the hungry, watch what happens next. Within 10 minutes, the video had 87,000 views. By minute 12, the mayor's office was getting phone calls. At minute 14, a news van from Channel 7 screeched into the cul-de-sac. The inspector's radios started crackling. Stand down, do not issue citation, repeat, stand down. The man looked like he'd aged 10 years. Supervisor Kowalski handed the empty bowl back to Amina. This is the best thing I've ever eaten, she admitted. We still have to file a report, but maybe there's another way. Betty handed the clipboard back with a triumphant grin. There always is, dear. That night the local news ran the headline. City backs down after viral video shows grandmother feeding hundreds. Comments poured in from all over the country. Protect Nanny Amina at all costs. Move over, Grandma's chicken soup. There's a new sheriff in town. Someone give this woman a key to the city. The next morning, the mayor himself called Tarek's cell. Dr. Khan, we'd like to help your mother get properly permitted. No fines, no fees, we'll fast-track everything. And could she cater the mayor's prayer breakfast next month? Tarek put the call on speaker so Amina could hear. Amina listened, then said in careful English. Mr. Mayor, I do not want special treatment. I want every grandmother in Dayton, Pakistani, Somali, Mexican, black, white, to be able to feed people without fear. Make the rules fair for everyone, then we talk about breakfast. The mayor laughed, a big warm sound. Ma'am, you just got yourself a meeting with the city council. 2 days later, Maya, wearing her first ever blazer, borrowed from Sarah, stood in front of the Dayton City Commission beside Amina and Betty. She read a speech she had written at 3 a.m. My name is Maya Thompson Khan. Yes, that's my new last name. I chose it. 6 weeks ago, I wanted to die. Then a grandmother fed me halim and called me family. This food is saving lives. Please don't make it illegal to be kind. The room was silent for 5 full seconds. Then the commissioners voted unanimously to create a new community kitchen sharing permit. Free, simple, designed for exactly this. They waived every fee. They named it, unofficially, the Nanny Amina Rule. When the meeting ended, reporters swarmed. One asked Amina, "How does it feel to beat City Hall?" Amina smiled the smile that had already launched 1,000 TikToks. "I did not beat anyone," she said. "I just refused to let children go hungry. Turns out love is stronger than paperwork." That night, back on Princeton Drive, 4 giant pots bubbled in celebration. Maya danced in the driveway with Ahmed and the Korean twins. Betty taught the firefighters how to make proper chai. And Amina added one line to her diary. March 9. Today the city learned what every grandmother already knows. If you try to stand between us and feeding our babies, we will move you out of the way with nothing but a wooden spoon and a smile. When the pots went quiet, Ramadan began on the first Thursday in April with a crescent moon, so thin it looked like Allah had drawn it with a single fingernail. Amina announced it at the end of the last pre-Ramadan Sunday. From tomorrow, she said, standing on her usual stool, the big pots will sleep. No halim, no sambuses, no cornbread with honey butter. We fast from dawn to sunset. The garage will be quiet. A collective groan rose from the driveway. Leroy, the quiet Vietnam vet, actually spoke for the first time anyone could remember. Miss Amina, some of us count on that meal. Amina's eyes softened. I know, Uncle, but Ramadan is when we learn what hunger really feels like, so we never forget the ones who feel it every day. When we break fast at sunset, you will all be here. The pots wake up then, just later. Betty raised her hand like a schoolgirl. What about coffee? Can I still have coffee? Amina laughed so hard she nearly fell off the stool. Betty, sister, you are not Muslim. You can drink coffee, eat bacon, dance naked if you want. Only we fast. Betty looked genuinely relieved. Good, because I tried fasting with you last year for 3 hours and almost committed crimes. The new plan was set. Sahur pre-dawn meal, family only. All day silence from the big pots. Iftar sunset, driveway feast, everyone welcome, pots bigger than ever. The first day of Ramadan, Princeton Drive felt amputated. No smell of onions at noon, no music, no line of cars. Just birds and an ache in the air. Maya, who had never fasted a day in her life, woke up at 4:15 a.m. with Amina and 8 dates and oatmeal in the dark kitchen. Her stomach growled by 10 a.m. By 2 p.m., she was lying on the carpet whispering, I take back every complaint I ever made about high school lunch. Ahmed, now 13 and officially too cool for most things, discovered that fasting turned him into a dramatic poet. He spent 5th period writing. My stomach is a desert. My soul is a desert. Everything is a desert. There is only sand. At 6 p.m., the street began to fill again, quietly. People arrived carrying dishes they had cooked themselves, because they missed the work of feeding as much as being fed. Mrs. Henderson brought deviled eggs because protein. Khadija and Yuba brought trays of glossy dates stuffed with almonds. The firefighters brought industrial-sized fruit salad. Betty showed up with a cheesecake the size of a manhole cover, and a note that said, for the weak and the elderly, that's me. The sun hung low and orange, refusing to drop. Amina stood at the garage door with her phone timer, counting down the seconds. Maya stood beside her, weak-kneed, holding the wooden spoon like a staff. At 7:42 p.m. and 11 seconds, the app chirped. Allahu Akbar. The call to Maghrib prayer drifted from someone's phone. Amina raised a single date. Bismillah, she said and bit. Then she handed one to Maya. The girl chewed, eyes closed, tears running down her cheeks. "It tastes like mercy," she whispered. Within minutes, the driveway was louder than any Sunday before Ramadan. Plates clinked, children ran between legs, someone turned on fairy lights. The pots, 5 of them now, roared back to life. Halim, chicken karahi, Afghan mantu, Betty's mac and cheese, and a new experiment called Halim lasagna that should never have worked but did. Lear sat in his usual corner and ate slowly, eyes wet. Betty found Amina an hour later and hugged her from behind. "I lasted until 11 a.m., she confessed. "Then I ate 3 cookies and cried because I missed you all day." Amina patted her cheek. "Missing is also worship." Every night for 30 nights, the pattern repeated. The street learned new rhythms. The quiet holiness of empty daytime. The electric joy when the sky finally bled into magenta, and the pots sang again. The way Maya's voice grew steady reading Quran after Tarawih prayers in the living room, even though she stumbled over half the Arabic. The way Ahmed stopped complaining by week 2 and started waking the house for sahur without being asked. The way Betty secretly fasted on Fridays, just to keep Amina company, and never told a soul until Amina caught her sneaking water and laughed for 10 straight minutes. On the 27th night, Laylat al-Qadr, the night of power, the mosque was too small for everyone who wanted to pray. So they prayed in the driveway. Rows of people, men in front, women behind, children squeezed wherever they fit under a sky thick with stars. Tariq led. Maya stood in the women's section between Amina and Betty, her first ever full Quran recitation shaking but unbroken. When they raised their hands for Du letter to BFA Macron, Amina's voice rose clear and steady. "Ya Allah, you brought a lonely old woman across the world to a frozen city. You sent her neighbors, then strangers, then grandchildren she never birthed. You taught us that a pot of Halim can be a mosque, and a driveway can be paradise. Keep these people ours, and keep us theirs, until the day we meet you hungry only for your face." A soft amen rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. After prayer, someone started passing out sheer kurma in paper cups. The Korean twins filmed it all for the final video of Ramadan. Title: We fasted, we feasted, we became family. It ended with Amina, Betty, and Maya arm in arm under the fairy lights, faces glowing. Caption: Ramadan taught us. Hunger is temporary. Love is iftar that never ends. The Eid that broke the city, in the best way. Eid al-Fitr fell on a Saturday in early May, the first truly warm day of the year. The sky was the color of Amina's favorite turquoise dupatta, and every tree on Princeton Drive had decided to bloom at once. The night before, Amina could not sleep. She sat on the back porch at 3 a.m. with Betty, both of them drinking contraband post-Ramadan coffee like teenagers who had broken curfew. "Tomorrow," Amina said, "the pots must sing louder than ever. 1 month we kept them quiet in the day, now they must make up for lost time." Betty grinned. "I've got 3 cheesecakes, 2 sheet pans of baklava, don't ask how a Lutheran lady learned, and a surprise I'm not telling you about until sunrise." At 5:17 a.m., the street began waking up on its own. First came the firefighters in Engine 17, lights off, sirens silent, parking sideways across 2 lawns because they wanted to help set up before shift change. Then came the Somali aunties in glittering dyers, carrying massive foil trays of malawa and samosas. Then the Korean twins arrived with a rented cotton candy machine and a drone for cinematic Eid content. By 7 a.m., the cul-de-sac looked like a wedding that had lost its invitation list. Tariq had officially given up on his lawn. He simply laid astroturf over the grass and declared it Eid turf. At 8:30, the Eid prayer was held in the street itself. The city had granted a special permit after the Ramadan showdown. Someone joked it was the fastest permit in Dayton history. Rows formed between parked cars. Firefighters in dress uniforms, next to teenagers in thobes, next to Betty, in her brightest Easter hat energy. Maya stood proudly in the women's section, wearing a lavender shalwar camis Amina had sewn for her, hijab pinned with a tiny silver crescent moon. When the imam said, Allahu Akbar for the takbir, 500 voices answered so loudly that dogs started barking 3 streets over. After prayer came the part everyone had waited 31 days for. The pots. There were now 8 of them, lined up like an army. 2 Halim, classic, and a new spicy version Ahmed insisted on. 1 mutton korma so fragrant it should have been illegal. 1 Afghani korma Betty had secretly learned from a nurse at the hospital. 1 vegetarian biryani for Ruth from the library. 1 experimental Eid mac and cheese, with crispy Halim topping that tasted like a war crime and heaven had a baby. 2 cauldrons of sheer kurma, so thick you needed a spoon and courage. And 1 giant pot of sweet rice that Cottage's mother had started at 2 a.m. Tables stretched from one end of the cul-de-sac to the other. Somali kanjiro, Mexican tamales, because someone's cousin heard, potluck, Korean japchae, Betty's cheesecakes, trays of jailbite dripping orange syrup, and a sheet cake from the mosque youth that read Eid Mubarak Nani Amina in wobbly green icing. The firefighters set up a bouncy house. Someone rented a camel, yes, an actual camel named Kevin who wore a little Eid topi and posed for photos. The Korean twins, drone flew overhead, live streaming to 1.4 million followers. At 11:07 a.m. the mayor showed up in person, tie abandoned, sleeves rolled, holding a plate like any other guest. He found Amina ladling sheer kurma and bowed dramatically. Ma'am, I've come to pay my respects and beg for dessert. Amina filled his plate until it threatened structural failure. Mr. Mayor, next year you help stir. Deal, he said, mouth already full. At 1:15 p.m. Tariq clinked a spoon against a pot and asked for quiet. The crowd hushed, no small feat with children on sugar highs and a camel chewing loudly. Tariq's voice cracked the moment he started. Today is not just Eid, today is the day we make it official. He gestured to Maya, who walked forward clutching a folder, eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. Most of you know Maya's story, some of you lived it with us. 6 months ago she was a stranger watching from a dark window. Today. He turned to Carla, Maya's mom, who stood beside Amina and Betty, all 3 women holding hands. Today the court has approved something we asked for the day Maya first slept on our couch. He opened the folder and held up the papers so everyone could see. Effective this morning, Maya Elizabeth Thompson Khan is legally the daughter of Dr. Tariq and Sarah Khan, and the legal granddaughter of Amina Begum. The street exploded. People screamed, cried, clapped, ululated. Someone set off leftover 4th of July fireworks. Kevin the camel looked mildly alarmed. Maya was passed from hug to hug until she reached Amina. She dropped to her knees in the middle of the street, forehead to Amina's feet, the way Desi children do when respect is too big for words. Amina pulled her up and held her face between both palms. Beta, you were mine the first time you cried into my Halim. Paper only caught up. Betty produced her surprise then, a giant wooden sign on wheels that she and the firefighters unveiled together. It read, in English and Urdu, Princeton Drive, home of Nanny Amina's pot, where strangers become family, one bowl at a time. They bolted it permanently to the curb. The mayor promised to make it official city property on Monday. By 6 p.m. the food was gone, the camel had gone home, and the street looked like a very happy bomb had detonated confetti and empty plates. Maya, barefoot and sticky with syrup, stood on a folding chair and yelled until everyone quieted. I have one more thing. She held up her phone. Last week I applied to college. I got in, full scholarship, pre-med like Baba Tariq. Another roar. She looked straight at Amina. I'm going to be a doctor, so I can take care of you when these pots finally make you too old to stir. Amina pretended to be offended. I will be stirring when I am 120, inshallah. Then she pulled Maya down into the tightest hug the street had ever seen. Later, when the sun set gold and rose, the call to Maghrib echoed again from someone's phone. 500 people, Muslim, Christian, atheist, unsure, stood together in the cooling air and prayed a simple prayer of thanks. When they opened their eyes, the fairy lights were on, the pots were empty, and the new sign glowed under the street lamp. Amina looked around at her impossible family, her son the doctor, her daughter-in-law the quiet warrior, her 3 grandchildren by blood and by choice, her Betty sister, her street full of hearts that had learned to beat in the same rhythm. She raised both hands to the sky and said the only thing that fit. Alhamdulillah for full bellies and fuller hearts. And somewhere, in a heaven that surely has the best view, Harold and Amina's husband sat together eating halim with extra lemon, smiling down on the loudest, messiest, most beautiful Eid Dayton had ever seen. The summer the pots went national. June arrived wearing 90-degree heat, and the smell of cut grass. The sign at the end of Princeton Drive now had its own Instagram account, at Nanny Amina's Pot, run by Maya and the Korean twins. It had 1.7 million followers, and a blue checkmark nobody asked for. Every Sunday, the crowd doubled again. People drove from Cleveland, Indianapolis, even Chicago. The city gave them an official parking lot shuttle from the mosque, because the cul-de-sac could no longer hold the cars. The pots grew to 12. A local halal meat supplier donated lamb by the pallet. A Punjabi farmer, an hour north, started delivering wheat berries in 100-pound sacks, because Nanny called me beta and I cried in my tractor. Betty's cheesecakes were now baked in the high school cafeteria after hours, because her home oven surrendered in May. Then, on the first Saturday in July, the sky turned the color of old nickels. A storm watch became a warning, became a tornado siren that made everyone's blood freeze. At 4:12 p.m., the heavens opened like someone had ripped the bottom out of a lake. Rain came sideways, thunder shook windows, the power flickered and died. Sunday Halim was scheduled for the next day. The garage flooded in 6 inches of water. 2 of the big pots floated like battleships. The fairy lights shorted out in a dramatic shower of sparks. Ahmed looked at the chaos and said what every teenager says in a crisis: "We're doomed." Amina looked at the mess, wiped rain from her face, and laughed. "Beta, I survived partition, 3 wars, and your father's teenage driving. A little rain cannot stop grandmothers." By flashlight and phone glow, the street mobilized. Firefighters pumped the garage dry. Mrs. Henderson's husband, who nobody knew was an electrician, rewired everything in 2 hours. The Korean twins turned the storm into a viral live stream titled, "Can Rain Cancel Nanny Amina?" Spoiler, no. Maya and 20 teenagers formed a human chain and carried every sack of onions, lentils, and spices into the house like ants saving their queen. At 2 a.m., the rain stopped as suddenly as it started. The air smelled clean, electric, alive. Amina stood on the porch in a plastic raincoat that made her look like a very determined duck. She looked at the exhausted, soaked, grinning army of neighbors and grandchildren and said, "Tomorrow we cook inside. Living room, dining room, kitchen, hallway, wherever there is floor there is pot." Betty raised a fist, still holding a cheesecake. Indoor Eid, round 2. By Sunday noon, the entire house had become a kitchen mosque cafeteria. Pots simmered on every burner, on camping stoves in the hallway, on electric griddles on the dining table. The living room carpet was covered in tarps and prayer rugs. People sat on stairs, on countertops, on each other's laps, eating halim off paper plates balanced on knees. Someone started singing an old Pakistani Milli Nagma. Someone else answered with Sweet Caroline. By the second chorus, everyone was singing both at the same time, and it worked perfectly. At 3:17 p.m., a black SUV with government plates pulled up. Out stepped a producer from The Kelly Clarkson Show. She had flown in from LA that morning after the Korean twins. Storm video hit 28 million views. She found Amina elbow deep in a pot the size of a satellite dish. Ma'am, Kelly saw your story. She wants you, Betty, Maya, and the whole street in LA next month. Live show. She'll fly everyone. The room went still. Amina kept stirring. Live TV, she asked in Urdu, then switched to English. I do not wear enough makeup for America. The producer laughed. You wear exactly enough. America is in love with you. Maya, covered in flour and teenage certainty, answered for all of them. We'll do it, but only if Kelly lets Nanny cook on the show and feed the entire studio audience. The producer didn't even hesitate. Done. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in August, 37 people from Princeton Drive boarded a chartered bus to Dayton Airport. Amina wore her best emerald green shalwar camis with the heavy dupatta she saved for weddings. Betty wore a fascinator the size of a satellite dish, because when you meet Kelly Clarkson, you dress like you mean it. Maya wore the lavender Eid outfit, now slightly tighter because sheer kurma is a love language with calories. Ahmed carried a small pot for emergencies. At Lax, they were met by a screaming crowd holding signs. Nani Amina, we love you. Columbus drove 14 hours for this. Feed Emmy grandma. The taping was chaos and perfection. Kelly cried within the first 2 minutes when Maya told her story. Amina cooked halim on national television, while Betty narrated like a sports commentator. And there's the wrist flick. That's how you know the onions are perfect. They fed the entire audience, 250 people, in 12 minutes flat. Kelly took one bite, looked at the camera and said, "This is the best thing I've ever tasted, and I've met Beyonce." When Amina was handed the microphone for the final moment, she forgot every English word she'd ever learned. So she spoke in Urdu, and Maya translated beside her, voice cracking. She says, I came to this country old and alone. You gave me a street, then a city, now a country. My pot was small once. Love made it big enough for everyone. Thank you for letting an old woman feed you. It is the only thing I ever wanted to do. The audience stood and cheered for 4 straight minutes. Kelly hugged her so hard both their hijabs came unpinned. That night the episode aired. Nanny Amina trended #1 worldwide for 18 hours. Donations poured in. Commercial kitchen equipment, halal meat for a year, a foundation in Amina's name to help grandmothers start community kitchens everywhere. Opera called. A publisher offered a cookbook deal titled The Smell of Cardamom in Ohio. Amina's only response was to ask if the book could have Betty's cheesecake recipe on the same page as Halim. They said yes. On the flight home, Maya fell asleep on Amina's shoulder. Betty sat across the aisle holding the wooden spoon that started everything, polishing it with the hem of her sleeve like it was Excalibur. Amina looked out the window at the clouds below and whispered the same DU letter to BFA Macron, she said every flight. Ya Allah, I left my country with 2 suitcases and a broken heart. You gave me back a bigger family than I ever had. Let me die stirring. Let the last smell on my hands be onions and love. 30,000 feet below, Princeton Drive waited pots scrubbed, fairy lights fixed, the sign glowing. The summer the pots went national was also the summer the world learned a grandmother's kitchen has no borders. The wedding, the book, and the longest night. September smelled like marigolds and printer's ink. The cookbook, titled The Smell of Cardamom in Ohio, arrived on pallets. The cover was a photo of Amina, Betty, and Maya arm in arm under the Princeton Drive sign, all 3 laughing so hard their eyes were slits. Inside were 142 recipes, half dictated in Urdu and translated at 2 a.m. by Maya, half written in Betty's neat schoolteacher cursive. There was a whole chapter called Dishes That Should Not Work, but do that included Halim lasagna, cheesecake sambusa fusion, and something called Betty's Regret brownies. Do not ask. The dedication page was only 5 lines. To every person who ever felt like a stranger. May you find a pot big enough to hold you. With loves. Your nanny, your Betty's, your Maya. Princeton Drive, Dayton, Ohio. It debuted at 1 on the New York Times bestseller list and stayed there for 16 weeks. Royalties paid for a real community kitchen behind the mosque, steel counters, 12 burners, a walk-in fridge big enough to get lost in. They named it Nanny's House and painted the door the exact turquoise of Amina's favorite dupatta. But the biggest event of the fall was not the book. It was the wedding. Maya, now 18, accepted to Wright State Pre-Med, still sleeping at Amina's house 4 nights a week, had been quietly dating Jamal, the quiet firefighter who always took 3 containers for the boys at the station. Jamal was 24, Somali, built like a gentle refrigerator, and the only person who could make Maya blush by saying "Assalamu alaikum" in the right tone. One Thursday in October, he showed up at the house wearing his dress uniform and shaking so hard his medals rattled. He knelt in the living room in front of Amina, Betty, Tariq, Sarah, Carla, and half the street, who happened to be passing by. With a voice that cracked on every syllable, he asked for Maya's hand. Amina pretended to think about it for 3 dramatic seconds, then pulled him up into a hug that nearly cracked his ribs. "My first wedding," she shouted. "We do it on the street, no hotel, no waste, only love and food." The wedding was set for the first Saturday in November, right after the clocks fell back, because extra darkness meant more fairy lights. Princeton Drive closed to traffic for 3 days. They built a wooden mandap meets minbar in the middle of the cul-de-sac, cedar arches wrapped in marigolds and Christmas lights, because Betty insisted, love looks the same in every language. The bride wore deep red with gold embroidery, heavy enough to need 2 people to carry the dupatta. The groom wore a cream sherwani, and the biggest smile Ohio had ever seen. 3 imams, 2 pastors, and 1 very confused Unitarian minister officiated because everyone who loved them should get to marry them. 700 people showed up. The food was cooked in the new nanny's house kitchen and carried across the street in a parade of pots, so big it needed police escort. There was halim, of course, but also Somali goat, Bangladeshi biryani, Betty's mac and cheese with crispy onions on top, and a 7-tier cheesecake wedding cake that defied physics. When it was time for the rukhsati, the bride leaving her parents, Maya did something nobody expected. She walked first to Carla, hugged her, cried. Then to Tariq and Sarah, hugged them, cried harder. Then she walked to Amina and Betty, who stood side by side like 2 ancient trees that had grown together. She knelt. First at Amina's feet, then at Betty's. "I have too many mothers," she said, voice carrying over the silent crowd. "I'm keeping all of you." Then she stood and kissed each grandmother on the forehead. There wasn't a dry eye from Dayton to Detroit. The dancing started at sunset and did not stop until 4 a.m. Old Somali men danced with little white grandmas. Firefighters did the Bhangra and only broke 2 tables. Ahmed DJ'd a set that somehow mixed Noor Jehan, Drake, and Sweet Caroline into something that worked. At 11 p.m. someone started a conga line that snaked through the entire cul-de-sac with the bride and groom at the front, and Kevin the camel, yes, he came back bringing up the rear. Winter waited politely until the very end. The first snowflake fell at 3:57 a.m., right as the last guest hugged Amina goodbye. She stood in the middle of the empty, glittering street, barefoot because her shoes had vanished hours ago, and watched the snow land on the marigold petals still scattered everywhere. Betty came and stood beside her, wrapped in Harold's old flannel coat. "Remember the first snow?" Betty asked. Amina nodded. "I thought I would freeze." "You didn't," Betty said. "You melted us instead." They stood there until the street was white and quiet again. Then Amina did something she hadn't done since the night before she left Karachi. She cried not from sadness, but from the weight of too much joy. Betty held her the way only 75-year-old best friends can. Snow covered the wedding arches, the pots, the sign, the camel hoofprints. It looked like forgiveness falling fresh. Inside the house, Maya and Jamal were asleep on the couch under 3 quilts, still holding hands. Amina looked at them, looked at the snow, looked at Betty. She whispered the same line she had whispered the very first night in Ohio. Allah is showing off now. And somewhere in the soft white dark, 2 old husbands who never met smiled at each other across paradise and agreed. Their wives had done pretty well with the time they were given. The longest night and the morning after. December 22, the shortest day of the year, decided to become the longest night. It started with a phone call at 2:14 a.m. Tariq's pager screamed first. A massive pileup on I-75, ice storm, 30-car crash, every trauma bay in the city already full. He was out the door in 30 seconds, still pulling on his coat. Then the power went out. Not just Princeton Drive, half of Ohio. The temperature outside was 4 degrees F and falling. Wind howled like something angry at the world. Inside the house, the heat died with a pathetic click. Amina woke to darkness, and cold so sharp it felt like a slap. She lit candles the old way, matches from the emergency drawer, hands steady even at 75. Maya stumbled downstairs in 3 hoodies, teeth chattering. "Daddy, the pipes are going to freeze." Betty arrived 10 minutes later wearing snow boots and a headlamp like she was going mining. "I've got Harold's old kerosene heater and enough cheesecake to feed an army. We're not dying tonight." Ahmed found the camping stoves. Sarah found every blanket in the house. They pushed all the furniture to the walls and made a nest in the living room. Mattresses, sleeping bags, bodies pressed together for warmth. The street WhatsApp group lit up. Power out everywhere. Anyone with a generator. Elderly neighbor on oxygen 2 streets over. Hospital on divert. Shelters full. Amina read the messages by candlelight, then stood up. "No," she said simply. "No what?" Maya asked. "No, we will not wait for morning. We open Nanny's house, now." It was 3:06 a.m. They moved like people who had practiced this in another life. Firefighters, off-duty now because the station had no power either, showed up with chainsaws to clear fallen branches. The Korean twins arrived with every power bank they owned, and a drone with a thermal camera, to find people who need help. Someone kickstarted the 2 industrial generators behind Nanny's house, donated after the TV show, never needed until tonight. The lights inside the community kitchen flickered, then blazed. By 4:00 a.m. the 12 burners were roaring. Amina stood at the biggest pot in her nightgown, winter coat, and a headlamp, stirring Halim like she was conducting an orchestra of survival. Betty baked cornbread in the gas oven that still worked. Maya and Jamal, still on honeymoon high, carried trays of chai to cars where families were stranded. Word spread faster than the wind. Nanny's house is open. Heat, food, blankets. By 5:00 a.m. the kitchen was full. An elderly Korean war vet who lived alone. A mother with a newborn who had no formula. A truck driver who slid off the highway. A nurse who couldn't get home. 20 teenagers whose group home lost power. They kept coming. Someone found folding tables in the storage room. Someone else strung Christmas lights on battery packs. Someone started a playlist of old Mohammed Rafi songs, mixed with Johnny Cash, because both felt like home tonight. At 6:12 a.m. the city power trucks finally reached the area, but the lines were too damaged. Estimated restoration, 18-24 hours. The fire chief showed up in person. "Amina, we're opening the high school gym as shelter, but we can't cook there. Can you feed 300 until power's back?" Amina didn't even look up from stirring. "Chief Uncle, tonight my pot is Ohio's biggest heart. Bring them." They brought them. By 6:00 a.m., the kitchen fed 532 people in shifts. Children slept on prayer rugs. Old men told war stories by candlelight. Maya walked between tables refilling tea, her face smudged with flour and exhaustion, and something that looked like grace. At 10:00 a.m., the news helicopters started circling. Live feed: Dayton grandmother keeps entire neighborhood alive in historic blackout. At 11:11 a.m., the National Guard arrived with cots and MREs. They took one look at the Halim line that stretched around the block and quietly put the MREs back in the truck. At 2:00 p.m., the temperature dropped to -9 degrees F. The pipes in Nanny's house started singing, the sound pipes make right before they burst. Jamal and 3 firefighters carried the biggest pots into the dining area itself and kept cooking over camping stoves in the middle of the floor. People formed a circle around the pots, like it was a campfire from ancient times. Amina's hands never stopped moving. Betty's voice never stopped telling stories. Maya's eyes never stopped watching her grandmother like she was witnessing a miracle in real time. At 4:47 p.m., exactly 24 hours after the power died, the lights flickered once, twice, then roared back to life. The cheer that went up shook snow off the roof. People hugged strangers. Someone started crying. Someone else started laughing. Amina kept stirring. Because the pot was still half full, and there were still people outside. At 6:03 p.m., the last person was fed. The last cup of chai poured. The last child tucked into a cot with a full belly. Amina finally sat down on a folding chair, coat still on, headlamp still glowing, hands trembling from 36 hours of stirring. Maya knelt in front of her and took those trembling hands. "Daddy," she whispered, "you can rest now." Amina looked around at the exhausted, glowing faces, her family, her street, her city, her country. She smiled the smallest, tiredest, happiest smile. "Beta," she said, voice hoarse, "when you feed people, you never really rest, you just pass the spoon." Then she closed her eyes and slept right there in the chair, headlamp still on, like a lighthouse that had guided every ship safely home. Outside, the snow kept falling soft and gentle now, covering the city in forgiveness again. Inside, 500 people breathed warm air that smelled like cardamom and cornbread and impossible love. The longest night was over. The pots had won. And somewhere in the quiet, 2 old husbands in paradise looked down, nodded once, and said, "That's our girls." 1 year after the longest night. December 22, 1 year later. The sign at the end of Princeton Drive has been repainted. The old wooden one is now mounted inside Nanny's house like a relic. The new one is steel, backlit, and reads in 3 languages. Ananias House. Amina Begum and Betty Thompson Way. Where no one eats alone. It was dedicated on a bright cold morning with the mayor, 2 congresswomen, and a CNN crew that had learned long ago not to get between Amina and her ladle. Amina is 76 now. Her hands have the tremble of age when she is tired, but they are steady the moment they touch a wooden spoon. She wears the same turquoise coat she wore the night of the blackout. Maya had it dry cleaned and framed the receipt for history. Betty is 76 and a half, she insists on the half. She finally learned to make perfect round chapatis and brags about it to anyone who will listen. Her garden now has a little plaque, Harold's roses watered with love and leftover Halim broth. Maya is 19, a sophomore pre-med, married 6 months, and expecting. She announced it last week by putting a tiny handprint in flour on Amina's kitchen counter. She still sleeps at Princeton Drive 3 nights a week, because the baby needs to know where it came from. Ahmed is 14 going on 40, captain of the middle school robotics team, and has officially banned the word "daddy" in public because it's embarrassing. He still sets his alarm for sahur in Ramadan without being asked. The pots never stopped. Nanny's house is open 7 days a week now. Breakfast for kids before school, lunch for seniors, dinner for anyone who walks in. The kitchen has a paid staff of 12, but the volunteers still number in hundreds. There's a wall of photographs inside the dining hall. The first snowman. The night the city tried to shut them down. Ramadan iftars under fairy lights. The wedding. The blackout. And one framed photo, enlarged and centered. Amina asleep in the chair after the longest night, headlamp still glowing, with Maya's hands cradling hers. Underneath, in Betty's handwriting. She fed us until she had nothing left to give. Then she gave some more. On the first anniversary of the blackout, 5,000 people showed up. They came from all 50 states. Some flew in from Canada, the UK, even Pakistan. They brought empty bowls and full hearts. The 12 original pots were joined by 50 more, borrowed from restaurants, mosques, churches, temples, and one Sikh Gurdwara that drove 6 hours just to stir. At 4:47 p.m., the exact minute the lights came back on 1 year ago, every pot was uncovered at once. Steam rose into the winter air like a single, enormous prayer. Amina stood on the same folding chair that had held her sleeping body a year ago. She did not need a microphone. Her voice, small, crackly, unbreakable, carried anyway. 1 year ago we were cold and afraid. Tonight we are warm because we kept each other warm. These pots belong to all of you now. Feed someone with them. That is the only rent we ever ask. Then she stepped down, took the wooden spoon Betty handed her, the same one from the very first cookie exchange, and started stirring. The line began to move. 5,000 bowls. 5,000 stories. One pot, multiplied by love, big enough for the world. Maya, rounder now, glowing, stood beside her grandmother, one hand on her belly, the other holding the ladle when Amina's hands finally tired. Betty stood on the other side, passing out cornbread and terrible jokes. Ahmed ran between tables with a GoPro, live streaming to 2 million people who would never meet them, but somehow still felt like family. Snow began to fall again, soft, slow, deliberate. It landed on scarves, on eyelashes, on the steam rising from bowls. Amina looked up at the sky and smiled the same smile she had smiled the very first night in Ohio. She whispered, just loud enough for Maya and Betty to hear. Allah is showing off again. And somewhere, in a heaven that definitely serves perfect halim with extra lemon, 2 old husbands raised their spoons in a quiet toast to the women who turned a little street in Dayton into the biggest kitchen in the world. The pots kept singing. They have never stopped. And they never will. Thank you for coming with me on this journey. If you ever feel alone, remember, there's a pot somewhere with your name on it. Just follow the smell of cardamom and love.